morning, everyone. Welcome to DC Today. I'm Kelly Wright, in for my good friend and colleague Dale Walters. We begin this hour with the Texas abortion law, one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. A federal judge suspended the law yesterday. U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman called the law a, quote, offensive deprivation of a constitutional right. Texas Senate Bill 8 bans abortions once a heartbeat is detected. That usually happens around 6 weeks, before most women even know they are pregnant. Last month, the Supreme Court allowed the law to stay in place. Joining us now to help break this down and this ruling and help us understand a little bit more clearly is BNC Chief Legal Correspondent Laura McNeal. Good morning, Laura. How are you?
Good morning. Great. Thanks, Kelly.
You know, good of you to join us this hour. First off, what does this ruling actually mean, and will it allow abortion providers in Texas to resume procedures?
Yes, and so essentially what this ruling means is the judge has temporarily blocked the enforcement of the Texas abortion rule. So that's Senate Bill 8. That means that it can no longer be enforced. So technically, from a legal standpoint, abortion providers can resume services providing abortions after that 6-week ban today. And many have already spoken out publicly and say they plan to resume services as soon as possible. But there is a caveat, there's a catch. In this law, there is a clause for a retroactive clause that says in the event that any abortions are performed under an injunction, meaning where a court has temporarily allowed the law to proceed, and then a higher court bans that and says, you know what, we're going to reinstate that law, retroactively, they can still be sued. So even though legally they can pursue abortions right now, if the Fifth Circuit Court, which is the appeal has already been issued by the state of Texas, the notice of appeal, if they come back and say, you know what, the Fifth Circuit, this law actually is constitutional, I'm going to lift the ban, let it move forward, anyone that pursues an abortion during that period could still be sued. So I think it's going to create a chilling effect because some people are afraid of legal liability.
Texas officials and pro-life organizations, by the way, are planning to appeal this ruling, Laura. Where does the case go next?
Yes, so it's going to be appealed with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. That was expected. We thought, obviously, Texas is going to try to stop this from happening, but then the next step is going to be the Supreme Court. So I think really this is probably a strategy by the DOJ. They know that the Fifth Circuit Court is very conservative, very likely to undo what we've seen today, meaning to lift that injunction, allow the law to go forward as it has been for the past 36 days. And I think they're buying time, essentially, allowing women to have access to these services until the Supreme Court decides on this case in the Mississippi abortion law.
So if this comes before the Supreme Court, does it come down to Roe versus Wade? And what's the likelihood the Supreme Court will overturn that 1973 landmark decision, which has become the law of the land?
Kelly, this is the ultimate showdown. We've known for years that potentially the Supreme Court might reverse Roe versus Wade based on the conservative stance, that 6-3 stance. 6 of the justices were appointed by conservative presidents. I think it's very likely that Roe versus Wade will be overturned and that the Supreme Court is going to leave the decision up to individual states to decide whether or not those services will be provided.
Look, I know you've got to go, but before you do, I want to ask you one other question. You know, this law that Texas implemented, what people really took exception to was the fact that it created almost like a bounty hunter system. Can you talk about that and why that perhaps not only caused concern, but also exacerbated a lot of the situations that had been unfolding leading up to the law in the first place?
Yes, and so it was very creative. What they did is they privatized, incentivized or made private citizens, essentially they're able to go and pursue legal action against people who aid and abet. So if you assist in an abortion in any way, then you are able to pursue legal charges against those individuals and you can receive up to $10,000. So essentially the law created bounty hunters. And the reason that's very problematic is because imagine you're in a Starbucks and you overhear someone saying, yes, I just got an abortion yesterday at this clinic. You can then go and sue that clinic for $10,000. And the reason it created a legal challenge or barrier, in a sense, is because how do you go after private citizens? They're not public officials that are banning this, but there's private citizens that are actually enforcing the law. So it made it very difficult to challenge the constitutionality of this law because it was private citizens that were carrying out the laws. And so very ingenious. It's never been done before. But I think when it gets to the Supreme Court, at least I'm hoping they will at least acknowledge the fact that these private citizens don't have what we call standing, meaning if you bring a lawsuit against someone, you have to actually experience an injury, and a bystander does not experience an injury. So that's some of the legal circus involved with this particular law.
You said legal circus. I think that's exactly what it's boiled down to. We'll continue to follow the developments of this news, and thank you so much, BNC Chief Legal Correspondent Laura McNeal. Thank you again for joining us today and weighing in on this issue. Last night's decision by a federal judge to put a hold on that Texas abortion law isn't the end of the fight over women's reproductive rights, as we just heard from Laura. But the battle will move to the Court of Appeals and is already shaping up to become a campaign issue for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, the best minds in politics are here right now to talk about last night's decision. We have Jessica Stone, journalist and author of Crossing the Divide. She's here, and she's joined by Dr. Niambi Carter, Howard University political science professor, and Timothy Allen Simon, chair of the African American Chamber of Commerce there in California. The Fifth Circuit Court will hear this case. It's the most conservative in the country, and there's a good chance the Texas law will be upheld, surely sending an appeal of that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. So here we are. Justices are already set to hear Mississippi's abortion law in December. Jessica, how will these new abortion battles impact the midterm congressional races? What do you think?
Oh gosh, it's a great issue to run on, isn't it? Because it is such a polarizing issue and such a divisive issue. I don't think it cuts completely along party lines. You know, there's a whole generation of Americans who've grown up without any need to fight over this issue, with the sense that this was an issue that had already been decided prior to their birth. So I think it will be really effective, particularly for progressives, to run on it. I think it could really make a difference in some close races.
And just to follow up real quickly with you, Jessica, if there's a standoff in the Senate between Democrats, people can obviously count on Joe Manchin being in the middle of that. The West Virginia senator says the Hyde Amendment must be part of the massive social spending bill fighting its way through Congress. The Hyde Amendment blocks federal funding from being used for most abortions, except in the case of rape, incest, or when a woman's life is in danger. So how do you think they'll square that when you look at the leader of the Progressive Caucus, as you mentioned, Pramila Jayapal, saying that she won't sign a bill that has that provision in it?
Well, look, I'm afraid to tell you, I'm not even sure we're going to get that far, because right now we're just trying to keep the government afloat, and we're just trying to keep the debt ceiling passed. And so it's really not clear, based on what's happening with the debt ceiling this week, that we're even going to get a vote on either the infrastructure bill or on the on the social spending bill. So I think we have to just see if we even get that far first. But certainly there's wide disagreement within the Democratic Party, more so just between some of the moderates, and of course the Democratic Party writ large is largely is largely for abortion rights. So yeah, we'll have to see how that pans out.
So Timothy, as Jessica was just pointing out, this is a very polarizing issue, abortion. Roe versus Wade was decided 48 years ago. What does it say about our politics here in America that this one issue can still dominate our country almost a half century later?
Well, it stays alive largely due to the fact that Republicans weaponize this as a way, as Jessica referenced, as a wedge issue, particularly in elections like the upcoming midterms, where former President Trump and the Republicans are already seeing an uptick amongst African American males, Latino males. And I think in terms of the Democratic argument, they're not capturing those who are possibly pro-choice, but do have concerns about abortion on demand and the term requirements of abortion. I don't believe the Democrats are properly messaging, particularly to the faith-based communities and the various views that various faiths have about the termination of a pregnancy. Abortion rights, abortion rights versus reproductive rights is really more the messaging to me. And unfortunately, it will create a partisan divide that we'll see come into play, not just before the courts, but in the upcoming midterms.
Yeah, and Timothy, thank you for that, because it really does paint the picture. Abortion rights, reproductive rights, they are similar but yet have distinct differences. President Biden says he will sign the spending bill with or without the Hyde Amendment attached. Reproductive rights activists are upset it may be added to the bill. Dr. Carter, should President Biden sign a bill that includes the Hyde Amendment if it's the only way he can get the bill on his desk?
I won't say what he should do, but I think it's clear that Joseph Biden is a practical politician. This is not, I don't think, a core issue for him. I don't think it's one that he will view as an obstacle to ultimately seeking his end, which is to be able to sign some piece of legislation into law. So I think he will do what is most expedient for his political ends. And quite frankly, I don't think abortion is a top issue for him.
Yeah, I have to agree with
Very
Niambi
good.
there. It's really clear that the Democrats will have no chance in the midterms if they don't pass something, and they need this infrastructure bill at a minimum to be able to run on it.